In the councils of government, we must guard against the NFL draft industrial complex.
What's going on? It's the Draft Industrial Complex. Aaron Nagler, Tyler, Brooke. Tyler, how the hell are you, man?
I could not be better. You know, a little bit of a midweek lull. It's Friday. We found out that Matthew Golden is visiting the Packers. So, I woke right up when I found out that news. It's a great day.
I absolutely love it. And we had discussed earlier in the week about doing something on pre-draft visits, the 30 pre-draft visits that teams are allowed, not underlined, italicized, not top 30 visits, because that nomenclature it grinds my gears, Tyler. And I know that it is very kind of pedantic of me, but it's, borne out by the types of guys that come through the doors of 1265 Lombardi. Why don't you take us 30,000-foot view here about what teams are looking for when they bring guys in? Now, not every team operates the same way, obviously, but there is you are allotted 30 visits prior to the draft. And why are teams bringing guys in general?
Yeah, so I think there's three big pillars, and it's typically how the Packers typically operate, right? One, and this is pretty straightforward, you're interested in the guy, right? Like, he's a good player, seems like he fit. It's kind of like you had a good first date at the combine, right? You met, you talked, maybe the Senior Bowl, things are going well, sparks are flying, bring them in, go to a nice dinner, have a workout. That doesn't necessarily just apply to guys that are going to get drafted too, right? Like it could apply to UDFAs, which I know the Packers brought in a couple guys. You're going to ask me about them. I have not watched them. I have no idea who they are. But it's a good kind of recruiting pitch because, these guys that go undrafted, they kind of get a pick where they go for as far as pay, best situation, all of that. So it's kind of, a pseudo almost recruiting visit in a way for those UDFAs. And then the other two, which I know the Packers tend to do their due diligence, medical concerns, right? If a guy is coming off a serious injury, maybe at the combine, something got flagged every once in a while. You'll see a guy that had heart murmur or something like that.
Right. Yep.
Or
they've discovered that on these visits at times.
Exactly.
Right?
You'll see a couple of those every year. Like a guy has an injury he did not know about. I think someone couldn't run the 40 this year because they found they had a slight hamstring tear they had no idea about. They're like, hey, you might not want to sprint full speed right now. And then, the other one's character concerns. This is kind of hard from the outside to, judge it entirely. Sure. But, at least from what I've heard, and, I can shout out some of my, colleagues that also have been able to get this kind of information, but we get these little nuggets of maybe why those character concerns or what they are and who those players are. Because, you'll see some visits, you're like, I don't know if that's the best fit. It's a little bit surprising they're bringing this guy in. Usually the answer there, if you don't know any medical red flags, is there's just some kind of background thing they want some clarity on.
Which makes sense. I mean, you're going to be making an investment in a young man. You want to get all your T's crossed, I's dotted, as it were, and know all about him. No doubt about it. Before we get to the list, it's interesting that, you look at the different reasons as you've laid out for guys to come in, and the undrafted guys, which, I won't put you through the ringer on them, but it is interesting. You mentioned the kind of free-for-all, right, towards the end of essentially what it is, undrafted free agency. I've told this story before here, but it was a long time ago, so I want to refresh people's memories, maybe if they've forgotten. The second draft I ever went to at Radio City, back when it was at Radio City, there was an agent sitting on the floor in the media area, and just outside the media area, actually. And we had struck up a conversation, and we just, we're talking, whatever. But that was in the third round on, the tail end of what was then day one. And then on day two, we got down, he was there again, and we got down to the sixth round, and all of a sudden he was just constantly on his phone. I mean, constantly through the sixth into the seventh, and then of course out of the end of the draft. And all he was positioning his guys for undrafted, wherever they would end up having the best shot, right? And he had all his charts about, this is before everybody had a laptop and all this, but that, it becomes this absolute, during the tail end of the draft, these guys are going to be, receiving offers essentially about, oh, look, you got a real good shot here and all of that. And to your point, you want to bring those guys in if there's one or two that you do want to make maybe an extra push and talk about their potential fit, not only in the building and in the franchise, but with whatever position group you might be, like, yeah, you've got a legit shot to come in here and really, earn a spot. So
yeah, and I think a lot of people tend to forget that when they're like, wow, everyone of these DFAs got signed within like 30 minutes of the final pick.
right.
Because of exactly what you're talking about, right? Like they have been negotiating this for the entire day. Because guys typically, is the way things are panning out, have a pretty good idea. And what's the downside to it, right? Like, you did all this homework and then oops, you got drafted and got a guaranteed
right.
amount of money. Like, oh no, oh shucks.
What an unlucky break. But yeah, it's and it's interesting that Brian also point blank said, sometimes every once in a while it's subterfuge. Although he did admit that was much more when Ted was in town. Like, I don't think Brian uses it that way, at least not nearly as much, but Ted certainly did. And they admitted as much afterwards.
Can I be honest? If I was an agent, I'd be pretty peeved by that. Like, just wasting my guy's time flying out. Like,
yes and no. I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, he can take as many of the visits as is humanly possible, and if you can fit it into your schedule, I don't think it's a major problem. I mean, they're putting them up, right? They're paying the travel, so I mean, I get it though. Like, I could be other places doing other things when you guys have no inclination of drafting me.
Unless you're bringing the jet out too, I don't know how I feel about long commercial flights. So.
Yeah, that's a fair one, especially guys bigger sizes, trying to fit in commercial flights, no doubt about it. Speaking of flights to Green Bay, you got to make a stop somewhere, but Matthew Golden certainly seemed to, and he is kind of at the top of the list now. The most recent that we know of, they're visiting the Packers, and man, I don't know. I'm two ways on this because I do love the player, and I do think they are genuinely interested. But if you pull back and look at the totality of his college career, and I know it's about projection and moving forward and seeing how he fits, man, there are some questions there that, even this final year at Texas, where I can understand why people are given pause when looking at the Packers potentially picking.
Yeah. I mean, transfer from Houston, you can make all the arguments about, just the Houston situation in general. But I really do want to focus on this year. And I think, I can appreciate a lot of the analytical arguments because, I do a lot of this, especially when looking at receivers. Especially this year, I've been trying to look at, guys that can beat man coverage. Right. If you take that stretch where Golden finally started to break out, he had something like 3.5 yards per route run against man coverage, which the all-time record for a season just in general is in the high threes. It's just trying to tell you how efficient he is.
Right.
And I think I've decided on two things of why I think the stats are a little skewed if we're looking at this year in a vacuum. One, I think Steve Sarkisian is one of the best, if not the best, college coach when it comes to designing plays. I have legitimate questions about his ability to develop pro talent. That might sound a little harsh, but when you look historically, even back to last year with Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell, I think those guys genuinely struggled as rookies, and it took them some time to get to speed. Worthy finally kind of got his footing the end of the year. Don't think Mitchell ever got there, and that's just coming from a guy that watched a lot of Colts games. The second part, everyone keeps complaining about, Matthew Golden ran a 4.2, whatever, but it didn't show up on tape.
It doesn't look like he runs that. I've seen that a lot on Twitter. No doubt.
I don't think he was allowed to run full speed because I don't think Ewers could get him the ball. I'm not saying that to be mean.
No, that's, it sounds harsh, right? But I wouldn't be surprised.
If he went full speed vertically, Ewers won't be able to get that. And you see so much of the tape where he gets open deep and has to wait for the football to the point it becomes a contested catch.
Right.
I love the use of analytics. I love that how freely available it is. I think it completely alters the way we can evaluate draft, but it has to be one piece of the puzzle. It can't be the only thing.
Can't be everything.
Right. I know there's specific people, I'm not going to say anyone by name, but they drive me nuts, that love to reply to me and only talk about stats. And I'm like, yes, I can agree that this is a concern, but it's one piece of the puzzle. And if you watch the tape of Matthew Golden, I keep saying it, he's my wide receiver one for a reason. There is no other receiver in this class that checks all of the boxes, size aside. And I know size is probably an underrated characteristic, but he can run every route I want him to. And I don't even think he's polished yet. I don't think he really knows the finer workings of playing the position, but he's just so damn naturally gifted and stepped up in the school's biggest moments in the playoff. I just love the player. I love the competitor. I love the speed, deceleration, body control, hands, ability to attack leverage. I think he checks so many boxes for me. The fact that the Packers brought him in is absolutely fascinating because we keep talking about them wanting this big-bodied X. Shoot, maybe they don't. Maybe they just want speed and to spread it out a little bit.
Which is possible. And that's I'm glad you brought that up because we have spent a lot of time this offseason already talking about, the Watson, the need for a type and or to find another way to replicate what Watson did because he's going to be gone, right? But there is every possibility that they just turn away from that completely and try to run a different style of offense. Now, it's not going to be a different scheme. It's still going to be Matt's stuff. Like they're trying to expand and expound upon the foundation they've built. But man, it seems like each and every year Matt goes down some road that maybe we weren't expecting on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think this year will be much different. And if it is like to try and maybe curtail the need for that type of player, that would be interesting.
Well, I think about it too. Like we saw a little bit last preseason where you're just kind of just doing install stuff, right? Where they liked to do a lot of this spread out stuff and then never really went to it in the regular season.
Well, and they got to the playoff game. That was what was so crazy.
Yeah.
Like they didn't use it at all, like you said, during the season. And then there was they went empty 5 wide against the Eagles. Like
now imagine that you could do both. Imagine that you could be this powerhouse team. You signed Aaron Banks to all this money. You can run the crap out of the ball. It's one of my favorite parts of this offense. I love that Seattle opening try. Like just get where you just assert your will run game. But then you're like, all right, they're kind of beat up from the run game. Let's just spread it out and just pick them apart and let Love be kind of a point guard and just kind of dishing it out. The ability to be multiple on both sides of the ball. We keep talking about all this being multiple on defense. Screw it. Be multiple on offense. You don't need the big-bodied X receiver. Get a Matthew Golden, spread it out, let guys run different routes. The secondary has no idea what every guy's going to run on a given play because you have all these versatile pieces. It's my pitch for Golden. It's not going to happen. He's not going to make it to 23, and then I will be sad unless they draft another fun player. But
this is the life of a Packers fan, though. We spend all this time talking about these great, fun, exciting players, and then the Packers don't draft. If they are available.
If you're in this process to only get excited when the player you like goes to your team, you'll never be happy.
You'll never be happy. I can guarantee you.
Draft Talk Therapy Edition.
Exactly. Another guy that came in rather recently is Mikael Williams, the edge from Georgia. He's a guy we discussed actually last week here because we were talking about edges and defensive tackles. But interesting that this is a guy they're taking a closer look at.
Bullshit strength, right? That was our trademark for him.
Yes, sir.
That one could be a medical, right? Like he dealt with that ankle injury that he said he rolled in week 1 and it never got better. So maybe they're taking a long look at it. I imagine playing on a bad ankle for an entire season is not good long term for that ankle. I've heard nothing but good things about his character, by the way. Like I don't think he's a rah-rah leader guy. He is a yes, sir, put your head down, like let's get to work kind of guy. Those guys are super valuable in a locker room. Even one that needs more veteran leadership. I love those kind of guys. I think he can really be a legitimate edge setter with power, bullshit strength, like we talk about, length. And if you can get him to get a bag as a pass rusher with this new defensive line edge coach, very interested about that because it's not just if they potentially drafted Mikael, it's how is Gary going to move forward? How is LVN going to move forward? Because how much of that was coaching, we don't know. But I like that they brought in a couple of different flavors of edges.
Yeah.
Because Mikael, I think, is a very realistic target at 23. And everyone's going to be like, we got an all athleticism, no production guy. I'm like, at edge, I get pressures and sacks are cool, but you got to stop the run. It's theoretically half the game. And I feel like we just really gloss over that point because I've watched too many Packers defenses where they run at a specific guy and nothing can get stopped. Get me that big edge setter that's like, oh, you want to run at me? I am so long and powerful. I will push that tackle into the backfield, disengage, and then get a billion TFLs. So
it's interesting you bring that up, and the fact that you're right. They have brought in different types because another guy that they did bring in was James Pierce from Tennessee. Now he's a different type of player to what you were just describing, right? Yep. Lighter guy, smaller guy. I mean, that sounds like when you look at him, he feels like the type of guy that Brian was kind of warning against, for lack of a better term, when we talked to him at the combine about, those lighter edges who are going to get run at, and can they hold up against those big offensive tackles throughout a game,
He cannot. Justice and I, if you watch Draft Talk, which I will plug again at the end of the episode.
Definitely should be listening and watching Draft Talk, 100%.
He plays from such a wide alignment. All of his pressures are just speed rushes from wide alignment against tackles that are not usually NFL tackles that struggle to gain depth in their pass sets, right? Like the viral thing when guys try to do the kick step at the bar or whatever.
Right.
I'm just trying to explain it for people that aren't as hardcore. He is very good as a speed rusher. And I remember watching the 2023 tape going, wow, if he can get a little bit stronger and work on some pass rush moves, that is a surefire first round pick. And he did neither of those things this year. In fact, I think he got worse. And then I've heard some things, and I imagine that's why they brought him in, because it's a little bit of a surprising visit, that he is not a fun person to work with, that he struggles.
Not a good rep to have.
That he really struggles with the discipline of the defense, kind of wants to do his own thing. He's freelancing too much, and it really puts a bigger strain on the rest of the group. So imagine that's probably why the visit happened. I get needing a speed rusher, so I'm not totally against it. I would like it more in the second round, third round. I don't think he'd make it past the second, because that is a valuable trait. Like, there's not a lot of true speed rushers. My concern, if we're just putting all the character stuff to the side, can you win in other ways? Because when you become that predictable in the NFL, these tackles nowadays are just too dang athletic. You can't just win with speed alone.
Yeah, and that makes a world of sense.
Yeah.
Another guy they brought in is the East Carolina corner, Ravel, who I got to admit, again, this is a guy I have not watched at all, so I'm not very familiar with this game. Yeah,
it's a really tricky one. Everyone was excited about him going into the year as a top cornerback prospect because he's super long. He's almost 6'3". He's tenacious as hell, and he can run like the wind, right? Like, those are all traits you would love in an outside corner. And the kind of the knock on him on 2023 tape is like, there's not really much polish here. And supposedly all these scouts I had heard from are just, not NFL teams, sorry, media scouts, I should specify,
right,
where they had heard a lot of how much he'd been working on technique in the offseason, how he's ready to show that off in 2024. And then he gets hurt immediately and tears his ACL, which really stinks. But I don't think he's a first-round pick, which stinks. I love the traits. I loved the tape. And I love a cornerback that's a little bit unhinged for this Halfley defense. You need those guys. It was such an aesthetic difference last year, watching how clearly they were coached up to, when you see run, you trigger.
Yes.
It's not like trying to get around the receiver. It's like you punch him in the face and keep your outside shoulder clean so you can funnel it back inside for the linebacker.
To your help. Yep.
And when you have a linebacker like Edgerrin Cooper, who is so fast that he can clean up everything, it really fits the run sport in the scheme. I hope that makes sense to everyone.
Absolutely. No,
it's why 100%. I really like Ravel. If they took him at 23 because the knee checks out, I'm totally fine with it, because I like a long corner that can run and isn't afraid to help in the run. That said, I don't think he's great against the run because he's a little smaller, but I think you can work on that. He can bulk up a little bit, and you can work on technique with him. Because I thought the corners this year got a lot better against the run just because of the way they run in the scheme.
Big time. Couldn't agree more. And you mentioned it. He's a little bit smaller, which makes me kind of curious, especially coming off the injury. And that's most likely what is driving the visit.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brian's coming off this, I guess not an experiment, but his time with Jair Alexander, who he did make a bit of an exception for when he drafted him, a little bit of a smaller corner, right? I'm not saying this kid's going to measure up to Jair, but, it's obviously there for all to see that if there is someone just a tick below their usual kind of requirements or measurables, what have you, Brian will pull the trigger.
Yep.
He's shown that.
Hey, listen, if they don't take a corner round one and he slips there, I'm sprinting that card up. I don't care about the knee. Like, it's an ACL.
Love it.
He's wired the right way. I want him to be a Packer. I just love competitiveness in my corners. It's probably going to bite me in the butt more if I was a GM, because, I'm probably not looking at other traits. I value it so much higher than I think a lot of other people, because I just want my corners to give a crap in all phases of the game, not just trying to cover.
Absolutely. And then back to another edge, another guy we talked about last week in Shamar Stewart.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that they brought him in, because this
For
is,
sure.
The idea of what we talked about last week is, that athleticism and trying to project how it's going to fit, not just in the league, but in your scheme. But also something you were talking about earlier, as far as how are you the guy, right?
Mhm.
In fitting in with everything you're trying to do, both as a program and as a defense. And I think, I love the idea of his fit in Green Bay. I
Yeah.
don't think for a second that he's going to be there at 23, though.
He might go top 10, man.
Yeah, that's my, sadness. I guess.
It's such it feels like it's a much more divisive topic online than when I went to the combine, because every single person I talked to at the combine was like, oh, he should be a top 10, top 5 pick. Like everyone thought he was just a special blend of, size, tools, athleticism. And I feel like it's just a theory. I think Elko tried to get his edges to bulk up too much up with run fits and not worry as much about rushing the passer. I think he isn't a lower your head, yes, sir kind of guy. He has like superstar charisma. I think that's the best way to put him.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't pan out, I could see that not rubbing off well on others. But if it pans out, and I feel very strongly that it will, I mean, he's going to be like one of the biggest stars in the NFL. I genuinely think that. And it's not because of his level of play. Like his level of play could be like good. And I think that he'll become like a media darling and end up getting all these deals, like kind of like what Micah Parsons is doing with Bleacher Report, right? Yeah. I can just absolutely see something like that, because just hearing him speak, he is meant to be on television. I really think that.
Well, he's going to have all those opportunities soon enough. No question about it.
It's not going to be in Green Bay unless they trade up. Like I think the latest I could see him going is like Atlanta. Like I just think he's too rare of a talent.
Yep. We're in total agreement there. Another wide receiver that the Packers brought in was Isaiah Bond, which was interesting. I remember when the Packers contingent was down at the Texas Pro Day, and somebody had listed who they might be watching. Of course, the usual names came off, but someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone said they might be looking at Bond. And lo and behold, now he's here on a visit.
Yep. Freakish speed. And you're talking about, outside of the size, if you need that vertical threat speed guy, he's the guy. I don't think it gets much faster. The problem is I don't think he does a lot of anything else well. Right. I'm not super high on him outside of that. I can see if you get him the right coaching and he's locked in, like, he's going to be really hard to cover at the NFL level. Another one I've just heard on the side, we talked about it on Draft Talk with Justice, but another one might be a character concern visit. Sounds like someone I had seen on Twitter said that the situation with him might be Jermaine Burton-esque, which is pretty rough. The rookie that had a lot of issues in Bengals, got called out by the GM this offseason, might be a cut candidate after just one season, and shared a locker room at Alabama with Isaiah Bond. So I can't imagine what that coach had to deal with. Not to downplay, it could be mental health things. Who knows? Love Bond, the player, as far as the speed and just the vibe thing I really enjoy is that he really leans into the Bond last name. He's wearing 7 for a reason.
There you go.
And he hits the Bond pose after touchdowns. And I am a little bit of a vibes guy at heart, so we got to make sure we address it.
I love it. And then there's a couple other guys who are kind of late round undrafted types who I'm not going to put you on the spot because I know you probably haven't gotten down that far as your lists go, but it's just great to be able to kind of get your take on these guys and just to remind people that the visits are often used for a lot of different things. It's not always like we really like this guy and we really want to draft him. Even sometimes it's to the medical stuff and getting to know you stuff, but oftentimes it's also just sowing seeds for later on in their careers. I mean, Andre Dillard last year, who they bring in after, his stint with Philly and then the Titans, that's a guy that they had in, and they liked in the draft process. So, all this information, it's not just for this draft process. It's for their careers as NFL players.
And I'll tell you, I genuinely don't know if a team does it better than this pro personnel department with the way they find gems and keep all this track record of everything. I'm blown away by it. I was thinking of that Rasul Douglas, Devondre Campbell. You're like, what are you cooking with where you're finding these guys out of nowhere?
Richmond Williams knows what he is doing. He's going to be a GM sooner rather than later.
I hope so, man. Like he's earned it with. Everyone wants to criticize the front office, and I always think like you can argue about the first round picks. I think they find good value in this day 2, day 3, and holy crap, do they find unknowns like Chris Brooks. Another guy no one heard of. I thought he was a phenomenal rotational running back this year.
Absolutely.
They keep finding
a great find. Yep.
Yeah, they keep finding value just out of nowhere. And I genuinely am impressed by it.
Absolutely love it. Tyler, been great as always. Definitely let folks know about your chat with Justice each and every, was it week?
Yeah, I think we're trying to do week. Who knows? So neither of us are hosts. We gotta make sure we specify that we're special guests on Frozen Tundra Frequencies. We're trying to go weekly. It's very informal, but we're just trying to get our thoughts on positions. We'll probably do some bang the table for players here in a few weeks and a little mock draft, but just follow our just kind of process getting ready for the draft. We've done 2 episodes so far talking about edges and wide receivers. I went on a kind of rant about Matthew Golden being my wide receiver 1. He is my number 8 prospect on my big board. Cannot get enough of the guy. So if you want to hear more about me ranting about Matthew Golden, go for it. But regardless, subscribe to Frozen Tundra Frequencies. It's not just draft talk. If you missed the old Acme Packing Company podcast feed, there's a lot of the same shows have been revived on that platform. So highly recommend.
Awesome. I'll have a link in the description of this video for people to check that out. Tyler, thanks so much, man, and I'll talk to you next week.
Of course.